Buenos dias. Good morning. Very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for coming to Paris.
No, it is a privilege.
No, it is my pleasure to discuss with you. I want to learn from you. So you have the bicycle.
Yes, this is exactly replica of the Mexico City.
That's the one you use in Mexico City?
Exactly.
Great.
It is as our Believe, the EcoBici.
Very good. Well, you know, by PSA groups, we believe that one of our mission, if not the most important mission, is to deliver freedom of mobility. It is what we are passionate about. We believe that this is our mission, freedom of mobility. And of course, having this strong mission, we are passionate about understanding what's going on in the world about customer behavior, and we see that urbanization, of course, is one of the biggest trends we have nowadays, and that is going to trigger a big change in the way people are going to be using this freedom of mobility in the big urban areas. We also see a big divergence between the urban areas and the rural areas.
Yes.
Big divergence. And I understand that you have managed great achievements in Mexico. And as I said, I want to learn from you, understand what went well in Mexico that we could learn from and try to adapt even better our proposals to the customers based on that mission that we have, protect and deliver freedom of mobility.
That's amazing. I think that it is different when we are talking about mega cities than if we are just guaranteeing this freedom of mobility in smaller cities.
Yes.
So the challenges are very different. And when you are to provide the public transportation or private transportation infrastructure, then you realize that, for example, the fact that the sharing economy is helping a lot in order to provide that freedom of mobility to citizens. Then you can customize some kind of services and also using technology and data in a better way in order to take care of that needs of the mobility of the citizens to go to work, but also to have fun, to visit the family, to provide and make the education needs also fulfilled. Because mobility, it is
Sure.
also about education and citizenship and governance.
You're absolutely right, and we have seen this through the PSA Foundation that we have, and we have seen that mobility is core to jobs, it's core to health, it's core to keep a social network that keeps the society alive and the society healthy and peaceful. And we have seen here a big divergence between rural areas and the urban areas. We see that in urban areas, the shared mobility is becoming bigger and bigger, and this is the reason why we have created a specific free-to-move brand, which is the mobility services brand of the PSA Group, in order to support and surf on this kind of trend. But tell me, what did you exactly do in Mexico City that improved the mobility of the citizens?
You know, Mexico City has been working for 30 years in order first to increase the public transportation system, but also to reduce the pollution. We used to be the most polluted city in the world, so we have higher levels of pollutants around us. And to diminish this pollution, we handle to provide better transportation system with better fuels for the city, to diminish the use of cars, and to provide also, for example, a bike sharing system back in 2010. And we have to recognize that we learned these from models as Parisian model and Barcelona. Those cities organized a bike sharing system before Mexico City, but Mexico City is very, very big.
Yes.
So these systems are very, very important to us because it is very difficult to move in the city. A large distance, 20 kilometers to get your office or your school or the university, if you do not use the public transportation. So once you are not using the metro, then you have you have a bike in order to reach the school or the store or the university or your employee. And that is the interesting thing about the bike sharing system in Mexico.
Right. So one of the questions we have, and I'm sure you will be able to give us some vision about this, is that there is, of course, an emission issue that needs to be fixed, and we have now the technologies to fix it. That's good news. And of course, all the big car companies like ours are now able to deliver zero-emission mobility tools. And this is going to be, I believe, more expensive because the technology at this stage is more expensive, and that's going to create a social issue because we cannot limit zero-emission vehicles to wealthy people, of course. That would not solve the problem. At the same time, I also think that there is a question that nobody is raising, specifically in the cities, but I think it's there, and I would love to have your insights on that matter, is what about the footprint of automobiles in the city? Are we tackling just the problem of zero emissions, or are we tackling also the problem or the potential problem of the automobile footprint in the cities where people would like to conquer more space, more areas for their daily lives? How do you feel about this?
This is very challenging because it depending also on how do you produce the energy, or how much energy do you need to fulfill those needs.
Right.
So if we are to electrify the mobility in the cities, not just the private one, but also the public transportation, the tram, all the tranvía in Mexico, also the electric cars are demanding much more energy that we are demanding right now. So if we are to plan a system which relies on electricity, we do need also to improve the way that we are producing that electricity. If we're still using carbon or I don't know, fossil fuels for producing energy, it is going to be worse, the remedy than the alternative. So this is expensive, thinking in the future. What we are dealing with right now, it is with a transitional period of the history that we are moving on renewable energies. But the speed that we are putting into getting solar, hydro, aeolic energy, it is the time that we have to think on how are we going to move this transition on and to provide the citizens with a good alternatives and clean air and clean energy.
Exactly, and you see the point you are underlining is quite surprising for us. I'll talk here about the Western world, specifically about Western Europe. It is very difficult to find somebody who is now embracing the full scope of clean mobility. The 360 degrees approach, the big picture approach, which starts with clean electricity, of course, zero emission and mobility device, but also the carbon footprint to manufacture all the things we need, specifically for electric vehicles, being battery manufacturing, battery recycling, rare materials extraction that is also, of course, carbon intensive. We have a hard time to feel and find the people who are planning on a full scope approach, the 360 degree approach, all of this transition that you have mentioned, because as you said, it's a possibly 15 to 20 year transition.
And 50 to 20 year.
15 to 20, 15, I would say.
Yes, okay. It is not too much.
No, but it needs careful and rigorous planning, as of course you know. So at the Mexican level or anywhere in the world, do you see now administrations who are able to take that 360 degree approach and be rigorously planning and implementing this transition across the full picture that we were mentioning? Did you find this kind of stakeholder?
Unfortunately, we have to align the wishes that all the stakeholders we do have around a quality of living in cities.
Yes.
But what we have found, I have been working the last 5 years managing a network of 346 cities of 60 countries. So I discovered that at the local level, the mayors are really committed to provide this vision to solve mobility problems for citizens, because mobility is becoming a need. And the air quality also, it's important.
Sure.
And the mayors are managing water and waste and mobility. And all these environmental challenges are all together joined in sustainability programs around the world. So we have a lot to share and learn from the successful experiences in cities around the world. That would be a very interesting approach in order to gain experience on what is working in X city and we can be exported to another one. But always we need to rely on scientific knowledge also. And that is very important, because some decision making at the political level is made by just, it is driven by the gain of elections or political
short-term goals.
Short-term, and sometimes are not very supported in science. So as much as we can involve in committees the scientists in order to help the private sector and also the governments to make decisions, the decisions can be more reliable, and we can trust on that information to be really happy with the decisions that we are taking as society as a whole, but also as a government.
Absolutely. You see, there is something that strikes me. Not only we have a hard time to find somebody who has a 360-degree approach, the full big picture approach, from clean electricity to low carbon footprint for recycling the mobility devices. But it is also quite clear that we have a quite negative approach. We don't want polluted air, we don't want traffic jams, we don't want. It's all about the negatives.
Yes.
But what about describing what is the vision for what would be an urban area, happy and healthy urban area for 2050?
That's
what
right.
do we want, instead of always talking about what we do not want? Okay, we don't want traffic jams, we don't want polluted air, that's very clear. We want a lot of free and easy mobility, but it is very difficult to find somebody who has a vision about what the cities and urban areas should be in 2050 for people to be healthy and also very happy in their daily lives.
What it is also very rare is to find an automobile company worried about these matters. You know, one tends to think that an automobile company what wants is to sell cars. But it is exciting to see that, for example, PSA is worried about not just selling cars, but also the future of this right of mobility, the urban mobility, the rural mobility, the quality of life of citizens, and the role of a huge company as PSA on this new way of looking at mobility. What do you think that can be the role of automobile companies on this?
Well, it's a great question, and we have a very specific case with PSA because 5 years ago, we were almost bankrupt. So the company almost disappeared 5 years ago. And this is still very fresh in our minds, which means that currently our biggest concern is to know how we should transform the company to be meeting the expectations and facing the challenges of clean mobility in the future. So we are not afraid of transforming ourselves. We believe it's a must. We will have to transform our company, but what we try to know is in which direction we should be changing and transforming the company to be aligned with those expectations. And this comes from the fact that 5 years ago we were almost bankrupt, so we almost disappeared. So it's still fresh in our mind. So we believe that the world is now, for us, completely Darwinian. Either we adapt or we die. It's very simple. which means that we are very curious and very eager. It is in our own interest to understand in which direction we should move. And that's why, again, we have now a mobility, service mobility brand from one side, car brands from the other side, and we are not afraid of transforming ourselves. But what we see is that as we don't see anybody who is able to capture the 360-degree approach of clean mobility, we don't see either anybody who would be able to tell us, well, we want the city to be like this, or we would like your contribution to be like this. But frankly, we're not afraid of transforming our company, but we believe, because of the short-term thinking that you were highlighting, that people do not understand the consequences. For instance, in Europe, we have 13 million people working on the automotive industry. 13. It's a lot of people. And we see that there's a lot of discussion about the objectives, CO2 objectives in 2030, etc. Nobody today is telling the MPs at the European Parliament what are the consequences of the vote they are going to do on October the 3rd, which is the day after tomorrow. Yeah. So the day after tomorrow, they are going to vote something in 2030, which of course goes in the right direction, but the speed and the magnitude at which we should move in that direction may have significant consequences on the social life of our citizens. And nobody is able to tell us and to tell them. It's much more important to tell them, because they have the power to vote, what are the consequences and the social consequences. So it's not only about changing the way we offer mobility to our citizens, it's also somewhere recognizing that the current Western society is based on the automobile that was created to deliver this freedom of mobility. The whole way of life is going to change based on what we want to achieve. So it's not only a question for the automotive industry, it's a question for the society. How do you want this society to become in 2050, not only in the cities, but all over the place, and also in the rural areas? If not, all of this is going to diverge at one point in time.
Yeah, and do you think that it is important that there is room for collaboration between automobile companies that maybe are your competition, but also you can collaborate with some other brands to provide ideas on to solve these kind of challenges?
You see, I think the answer is we must. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that we are able to, but we must collaborate. There is no, from our perspective, there is no other choice. If not, we will disappear anyway. So we must collaborate. And this is the reason why, if we want to have fair competition that is going to be active to the best benefit of the consumer, we need to show the way on a long-term perspective. If we are changing the goals in terms of direction and magnitude at a high frequency, what will happen is that some car companies will die. That will create social unrest, that will create drama, and this is not going to be helpful for the societies in which we operate. So if we don't give a long-term goal, a 2050 goal or 2030 goal for the companies to bring the best of their technologies and compete in a fair way, then we will be changing direction in a very messy way. And if it is messy, you have to be Darwinian, and not all the car companies will survive, because they are not all in a Darwinian mode. And that will not be to the benefit of the citizens, because that will create unemployment, that will create unrest, that will create costs for the society. So yes, we must collaborate. And I think the responsibility of the leaders, the political leaders, is to create a stable direction as much as they can, which goes far beyond the political stakes they are involved with. And of course, creating a fair competition framework in which we can collaborate and compete at the same time.
There are a lot of measures right now around the world taken against cars, because we are to prevent the pollution and the traffic and to provide mobility. And there is a bet for public transportation mobility around the cities against the private usage of cars. What do you think about the new way of sharing and mixing up different transportation methods, as bikes and scooters and Ubers and cars and public transportation? How it's going to be that mixture in the future?
There is one thing I would like to share in terms of observation. if you look at the automotive world for the last century, there are two things that the consumer and the human being have not compromised with for 1 century. Two things. One is safety, and the other one is comfort. Safety is a must. Nobody wants to trade off anything against safety. So safety about the technology, safety about the mobility device, safety about the people with whom you are traveling. So all of this is about safety, and human beings, generally speaking, do not compromise on safety. But the other thing, which is also very interesting, is that for the last century, human beings are looking for more comfort. More comfort in terms of entertainment, in terms of heating, in terms of air conditioning, in terms of seating, in terms of ergonomics. It's all about comfort. So safety, no compromise, and comfort always plus, plus, plus. So a multimodal transportation system for us is fine. I think that works. And I think it is a combination between rural areas, big distance traveling, and short distance traveling. And of course, we need to adapt to that. In urban areas, I still think that our leaders are not showing the way beyond being in a negative mode, which is, I don't want this, I don't want that, but at the end of the day, what do you want exactly? What is the end game? What is the vision of the city organization and the city quality of life for 2050? I think that's what we need to understand. And that's a big responsibility for the politicians, of course. And it's difficult. I recognize it's a difficult job. It's their job. Each of us has his own job. So multimodal transportation for us, it's absolutely fine. And we are even selling cars with an electric mobility device in the boot that you can charge in the car. So you park your car, then you have your two-wheeler mobility device, which is electric. You go and you come back, you charge again in the car, and you move with your car. So for that, it's absolutely okay. We have no problem with that. But at the end of the day, again, I see a big divergence between rural areas and urban areas. That starts to be a political problem. You see, in Europe, people living in the countryside, which is a marvelous countryside, as you know, in Europe, all over the place, they don't feel represented by the urban elites. And they feel that the urban elites are deciding for themselves in a selfish way for downtown, because there are big monuments, nice gardens, and nice places, and they don't care about the low-cost mobility that is needed in the urban areas to go from a point A to point B, simply to go to the hospital, to go to the doctor, or to go to the job, to go to the employment. And that divergence is not healthy, because it creates a breakdown in the society. And I think we are not taking care of that, because the urban elites are deciding rules that are primarily aimed at making a better mobility, a cleaner mobility in the cities, but not looking enough at urban areas. So I agree that we will have a more fragmented system that needs to be better combined. If not, only wealthy people will be able to afford autonomous vehicles, zero-emission vehicles, high technology, very high price. And on the other side, you only have shared mobility, which brings a big hole in the middle, which I don't think is the way to go.
And do you think, I realized, I learned that PSA has been building bikes also from long time ago. And have you ever think that you can also provide a bike with a car, or also be a provider of bike sharing projects around the world? Because this is an industry which is growing a lot. When we started these projects in Paris or Mexico City 10 years ago of bike sharing, there were only 20 cities around the world with bike sharing programs. And right now we have 1,600 cities with bikes, which also is creating some chaos in some cities. I don't know if you are aware of these bikes all around.
On the sidewalks.
In the sidewalks and in public space, invading also the pedestrian sites. But we do need to organize all the different modalities of transportation in the public space, which is limited. So how do you think that it can be planned properly, a city which has space for all, not just, for example, we have been 100 years creating infrastructure for cars in cities. They are very, very free to move everywhere. But pedestrians and bikes, and sometimes public transportation, do not have the same public investment or infrastructure to thrive in the urban jungle.
Yeah, it's a jungle, you're right. You see, one of the things that it's quite easy to anticipate is that with all the two-wheeler devices that we now have, there will be more accidents on the sidewalks between two-wheelers and pedestrians. This is going to happen very soon, which then is going to trigger another negative reaction, which is, okay, you cannot go on the sidewalks with a two-wheeler, so where do you go? Well, you go where you have the cars today, and that will create another kind of accidents, which means at the end of the day, we are back to our initial question, which is the footprint of automobiles in the cities. Perhaps some cities will have to decide, well, we don't want automobiles anymore, or the footprint of an automobile in the city needs to be below this level of square meters. You cannot be bigger than this. All of this is acceptable as long as we plan strategically for it. Exactly. It's the same thing of clean mobility. Nobody is planning for the 360-degree approach. And in the city, nobody is giving the 360-degree approach either for how you want to organize the space in the city. Perhaps few lanes for the cars, one more lane for the two-wheelers, more space on the sidewalks. All of this is still very, very short-term oriented. And exactly. As I said, we have a lot of business in two-wheelers, bicycles, two-wheeler electric mobility devices that you can put in your boot and charge in your boot in your car, also motorcycles. We are in those business and we are very fine with that, very relaxed with this approach. But if we don't have a vision for what the urban areas should be in space allocation, area allocation, the footprint that you allocate to sidewalks, to two-wheelers, to cars, etc., then it's very difficult to plan and support.
Do you know what? This is very challenging for cities because we have to deal with a transitional policy which includes all the modes, at the same time, all the technologies. You cannot switch from one day to another overnight from electric to diesel or gasoline. So the big challenge is the transition, because we can draft the future we want to live in. But now we have a very, very different reality. So if we are to design a new city, it's going to be easy. But if we have a city already.
Yeah, it's not a white sheet of paper. You start from existing.
You start with the streets that you have. Think about the metro here in Paris. It is designed where they used to have the streets because they cannot dig where the castles or the other things were built up. So that was determined by the streets. So they build the metro lines on the streets. So we are determined by the construction that we already have. For example, Mexico City is a city which was founded on the 16th century. And also we have aquifers and we have a lot of troubles of managing water, and we have also a challenge of earthquakes. So the resilience of the city, it's a matter that we need to plan on, but while we are using the city, it's like changing your clothes while you're still being dressed, you know?
Yes, absolutely. It's quite challenging. I recognize that's not an easy job. Huh?
Yeah.
I recognize that. And you see, then the key question will be, what about urbanization? What about the 9 billion people that we'll have on the planet by 2050, right? And one question we could raise for ourselves, which is a big one, is urbanization the end goal? Is it the best way for humanity to progress? Is it to bring everybody together in urban areas? Can we manage that? Because, as you said, the speed of technology is now becoming much bigger than the speed at which we can change the environment and adapt, right? There are so many interests, so much fragmentation in the society that technology goes 1 million times faster than our ability to change and to decide and align the interest of everybody. So that's really the key question, of course.
I have read that data is the new oil, because as soon as you can manage data, and for example, understand the mobility patterns of citizens, you can customize the services, transportation and mobility services. So if we are to thrive on mobility in cities, I think that the data management must be shared with private sector, public sector, scientists, in order to craft a solution. But as you said, 360 degrees, taking care of environmental impacts, economy, and also the needs of mobility and how the new technologies and the new fuels and the new energy production can be speed up in order to fulfill all those needs. And the demographics, as you said, is gonna press a lot the needs of mobility in urban and also rural areas.
Absolutely. The demographics are going to be key. I think this is something that we are not taking enough into consideration, the fact that 9 billion people in 2050 on the planet is going to be a huge challenge for humanity. The other thing is that we should never forget safety and comfort. Those two pillars are still there. Yesterday I was listening to a gentleman on the French TV. He was saying that he's creating more car sharing parkings in the highways to promote the fact that people come to this parking and you can have car sharing. And the journalist was asking, yeah, that's a great idea. So you can have more people in the car, so less CO2 emission. That looks great. But what about safety? How do you know that the person you are bringing in your car is somebody who is honest and reliable? And he was saying, well, that's not a problem because we have our database and we are going to filter the people. We are going to evaluate if this person is a good person to tell you, yeah, you can travel with him because it's safe. Well, but then what about the private data and all of that? You see, all of this is connected because if you want to have a huge scope of car sharing, you want to ensure that the people you are traveling with are honest people.
Yes.
And if you want to know if they are honest, you need to track their lives. If you want to track their lives, then you need to know a lot about them, which eventually is not what each citizen would like. So all of this is interconnected. It's a big challenge. And of course, if we don't work together, this is not going to happen and it's going to be chaos. By the PSA group, we are prepared for chaos. We want to change our company. We want to be Darwinian. We know that we need to be Darwinian. We're not afraid of that. But we are looking for the best direction to collaborate and understand how we should be transforming ourselves.
And you said that the challenges are to take care of safety and comfort.
Comfort.
In the side of safety, we have still having a lot of problems with accidents.
Sure.
And we are going to have more accidents. We have these two wheels with high speeds in the streets.
Yes.
And in the side of comfort, you know, there is a moment where the car is not comfortable anymore. Mm-hmm. If you are stuck in traffic for 3 hours to get in a place and you do not have park and etc., etc.
Fair enough.
Then it's not comfortable anymore.
It's true.
So the massive use of cars becomes being uncomfortable because it was comfortable when there were just a few of them. In Mexico City, we have 7 million cars. Mm-hmm. So it is not comfortable anymore. I prefer to use public transportation, which is not very good. So we also need to seize the charge capacity or the capacity of the cities. How many cars do we can handle in a specific infrastructure, and how to grow the infrastructure in order to have more cars in that specific space?
You're absolutely right. And you know, with all the progress that has been made on connectivity, it would not be very difficult to control and manage the number of cars that you want to allow in a certain area, managing the density of cars. That's absolutely possible. then the question is how you filter. Is it the first in, first out? Or there are other criteria to say you can go, but you can't. Oh, why can he go and I can't go? Because his car is cleaner and your car is not. It's a lot about social issues. When you go to the ring in Paris at 6 a.m., most of the cars you see on the ring in Paris at 6 a.m. are low commercial vehicles.
Yes.
People coming from the suburbs to support downtown. Those people don't have the biggest wealth. They have a 10-year-old LCV. They come to work and they come to support the high quality of life of Paris.
Yes.
So if you start saying, well, yeah, okay, guys, you cannot go because your car is not so, you see immediately all the social consequences at one point in time. This will also trigger something about the wealth distribution. So in fact, when you look at all of these things, private data, wealth distribution, access to cities, you are seeing that it's the whole society. This is something that is not related to the automotive industry. This is related to the Western society.
Yes, you know what? In Mexico City, 30 years ago, we started a program to fight against air pollution because we have 4,000 people dying in the city for air pollution related illnesses. So back then, we designed a program to select who is going to use the car what day. And depending on the air quality of the day, you are allowed to use your car or not. There are days that we have a high level of pollution, so ozone and PMT particles. And we determined to 20% of the vehicle fleet cannot be used in the city depending on your plate and your technology. Afterwards, it becomes easier to determine that because the technology of cars was better. So we started use fuel injection and catalytic converters. So we separate those cars. Modern cars can circulate or be used every day. But those that are old cars cannot be used once a week, for example. So that kind of decisions are very hard also for governments and politicians.
Yeah, unpopular.
Exactly.
Sure, but we used to say that the unpopular leaders of today will be the heroes of tomorrow, which is the opposite of demagogy, which is killing, is a cancer of our societies. I think that makes sense. At the same time, we need to realize that when you look at the price of a very compact light commercial vehicle, if you want to say, well, you can only go downtown if it's electric, you cannot go if it is internal combustion engine driven, then it's a threefold. It's 3 times more expensive currently, which then brings us back to the social issue and the wealth distribution issue. How do you manage this? I used to say that clean mobility is like biofood. It's more expensive. And is the society ready to face this? Because if you don't sell the clean mobility at the appropriate price because of the additional cost, then either you have restructuring in the car companies and then you have unemployment, or you have to subsidize somewhere the sale of this car, which is, of course, a burden for the society and for the tax system of the country. So all of this is about big challenges. And again, what is interesting and exciting, and we feel good about it, is that all of this is not about the automotive industry. All of this is about, we have built a society around cars for 1 century. Now we discover the side effects of this, and we would like to correct it, which is fine with us, and we are not going to be an obstacle on this path. We are going to support and adapt because we are Darwinian. But do we really understand where we want to go? And it's only discussing with people like you that we can learn. Because up to now, what is very striking is everything related to the environment has been so negative. It's all about punitive decisions. How can we make environment something fun, something that we are proud to support in a way that is not making our life impossible?
Yeah.
And moving from punitive environment decisions to, I would say, proactive, independent, natural decisions, spontaneous decisions is a real challenge. There is, as I said, one of the key challenges is to make sure that while we transform the society and the mobility, we understand scientifically what we are doing, which needs a huge scientific background and a 360-degree approach of the mobility needs of the population. Understand that in Mexico City, you have gathered a significant number of scientists to support your strategic thinking. Could you explain to us how you manage this?
Do you know what happened before the city set these restrictions for the car usage? We need to gather enough scientific knowledge to support decisions. It is not I don't know, an occurrence of a governor or the mayor of the president. So the city created back 30 years ago in 1992 a commission, metropolitan commission, backed up with the scientists in order to determine, for example, the way of monitoring the air quality, how much of each pollutant we have, and how to fight against each pollutant. So they made recommendations, and that recommendations were discussed at all political levels. But without that support, it is very difficult to defend in the front of the society a measure that says that you are not going to drive your car once a week, for example. Mm-hmm. So that was very important. And the second thing was to organize a comprehensive program to take care of the air quality of the city for 10 years, because all the governments involved in the commission, the federal, the local, and the mayor and the municipalities, change every time, 3 years, 6 years, the direction. And the plan cannot be changed every 3 years. So we organized a comprehensive 10-year program. We have had four programs, 10-year programs, in order to stick on the main
keep the direction.
Policies that the city needs, all the metropolitan area, involving 59 municipalities around. And both things, I think, that contributed to have a decreasing air pollution in the city the last years. If you see the trend of Mexico City, we're still being a polluted city, but we used to be very, very bad back 20 years ago. So that works.
Well, that's fantastic because I think that's really thoughtful. As we said, we need to have a vision for what we want to have as a living standard in the cities in 2050, and we understand that all of this needs to be driven by a scientific approach that goes in terms of lead time far beyond the political framework and the political time window. So it's far beyond the 3, 4, or 5 years time window of our politicians. So we need to help them with a scientific background that gives direction, persistency on the implementation of those plans. I think that makes total sense, and we need to step out of demagogy. We need to step out from just putting a camera on the tailpipe of a car. Is certainly very spectacular, but it's not representative of the full problem that we have to solve. It's very surprising and somewhere sad to see that when we decide in the cities that we don't want diesels, we increase the CO2 emissions, but we reduce the particles. So the particles is an urban problem, and the CO2 is a global problem, right? And that contradiction is not very supportive of the things that have been decided, because you are solving the particle problem in the cities, but you are increasing the CO2 emissions in the global planet. So is that fair for the people who are living in the rural areas? Perhaps not. We don't know, because the people in the rural areas are going to be the first victims of climate change.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, again, we need to step back. We need to get rid of all of this demagogy, which is the cancer of our democracies. We need to think scientifically beyond the time frame of elections and make sure that we give a persistent direction. And it was great to discuss with you. Thank you very much for your insights. I learned a lot through this discussion.
I learned
and I hope that we'll have an opportunity to continue to discuss all together.
It would be my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.